When it's all said and done, I believe the MagicX XU Mini M will be one of my favorite handhelds to come out this year. But I'll say right now, I would not recommend buying this handheld, at least yet. So in this video, I'm going to be giving my first impressions of the MagicX XU Mini M, and these handheld names are always quite a mouthful. So yeah, we have this new handheld here, and I just got this thing in the mail, and I was really excited to get it out of the box because this is actually my first handheld from this company, and from what I understand, it actually is a newer company, or at least under this name, they haven't put out a whole lot. So I was happy to get my hands on a MagicX handheld. And I decided, as you can see, to get the orange and white color. So this handheld, as you can see, and by its name you know, is a mini handheld. It comes with a 2.8-inch screen. It actually has Hall sticks, which is really nice for such a cheap handheld. This handheld actually comes in at around $50. I ended up getting it for a little bit under $50 using a coupon code, and I'm sure when it's on sale, and I actually bet as time goes on, you'll be able to get this handheld for cheaper and cheaper. So I bet maybe within a few months, or maybe by the end of this year or towards next year, assuming this handheld is still being produced and everything else like this, I'd imagine you'll be able to get it in the 40s pretty consistently, or maybe even in the 30s at some point. So this being a pretty affordable handheld already, I was just excited to see another addition to the mini handheld scene. We've had the RG28XX, we've had the Miu A30, and now we have this all in the same 2.8-inch screen category. But what makes the XU Mini M more interesting is that it comes with an RK3562 in it, which is, from what I understand, the first of its kind in any retro handheld, so this is kind of uncharted territory. So let's turn it on and I'll show you guys the OS, and you can see we have Arc OS. It has been customized a little bit. I don't recognize all these graphics from anywhere else before, so it's a pretty standard Arc OS experience. You can see all of your consoles here. There's some interesting graphics we have for certain consoles, but before I get into the emulation and the controls, I do actually want to start off with one thing that I find pretty bad, and what goes into me saying right now why I wouldn't really recommend buying this handheld yet. It's that we really already have a lack of settings. We don't really have a dedicated settings page here. We have very limited options. You can see in here all we have is an option to test out the controls. We have down here in the middle a G button, which is basically going to be your function key. So opening this up, you can see we do have a limited menu here, but really this isn't going to bring you any settings you can tweak. It's just going to have options like you can see here to power off the handheld. So there's no settings here, and here's where in my opinion things get a little bit impractical and kind of strange. You actually have to open up, from what I can tell, there might be a way of doing this that I don't know through the UI, but you actually have to open up one of the consoles and then press the G key, and you can see we do have some more settings. For example, you can go down and affect the brightness if you want. So I think it kind of is strange that you can't do that from the home page. You actually have to go into a console and then go into your settings and change it from there, but whatever, that's not the biggest deal in the world. But as you'll see when I get more and more into the emulation, you'll see that there is an even further lockdown of the settings where you really would like to have access to certain settings. You can't actually go into RetroArch in here, which is not good. This may change in the future, and I'm actually going to give some information on some updates with that towards the end of the video. But right now, you're really locked down when it comes to some of the settings, and when it's relevant for each console, I'll mention that. But yeah, that's a big problem so far. We really have a lack of settings in this handheld. That's unfortunate because I really do love this handheld, but yeah, let's actually get into the emulation, and through that I'm going to talk a little bit about the controls. Of course, we can expect to be able to do all 8-bit and 16-bit era emulation. Of course, once again, you cannot use RetroArch. You might want to adjust certain settings for Game Boy, for example, but you're not going to be able to because we don't have access to RetroArch. Now, certain consoles, certain handhelds will give you some limited amount of settings, but they really are very stripped down, and I know some people really love that level of customization that you're not going to be getting here. These lower end systems will play fine, but yeah, it can be a little bit frustrating if you want to do something specific and you know you're capable of doing it on the hardware, but you're just not able to do it yet. Now I'll mention one thing real quick before I get into the hardware emulation like N64, PSP, Dreamcast. The controls really do feel nice on here. Again, we have Hall sticks on this handheld, which is really interesting for such a cheap device that you can get for a little bit under $50. I don't really have any complaints about them whatsoever. Maybe you can say that you can push them a tiny bit hit and get no movement registered. There's a little bit of a dead zone that's not, to me, too big of a deal. I probably wouldn't notice it at all, but I did see that pointed out earlier, and I did test it out, and yeah, I guess it kind of is a thing. For what you'll want to do on this handheld, I find them to be really good, but when it comes to the D-pad, some people have been unhappy with it. Those issues have been that it's just hard to hit diagonals. You can see me here messing around with it a little bit. Of course, to want to get a diagonal, you'll want to see, for example, down and left both active at the same time, and you can do it. You can hit diagonals, but I do kind of see the issue, and you can probably see as well where sometimes it can actually be a little bit hard to hit. Accidental diagonals definitely aren't a thing on this handheld, so if you hate accidental diagonals and you want a D-pad that's not clicky, this is not a clicky D-pad, this might be a good one for you if that's something that drives you nuts, because diagonals are a little bit harder than you might want to hit on here. I still think it's an okay D-pad, and it's not so bad it's unusable or anything. I think if you really want to, when you want to hit diagonals, you'll be able to. In my limited testing, I found it to be usable so far. And then we have our ABXY buttons. They're not the glossy ones that you might get on an Anbernic handheld, for example, but I find the size and the feel to be pretty good with them. No real complaints, no huge compliments or anything. They're just okay buttons, and I'm happy with them. Then we have our shoulder buttons and triggers, and these are clicky, maybe a little bit louder than I like, but I think they're fine, and I don't really have a whole lot to say about them. They're of course in line, and a lot was done, I think, to make this a small, of course, mini pocketable handheld. You can see not a lot sticks out. So of course, trying to stack them wouldn't be super great if you want it to be really pocketable. So now getting into some harder to run systems. So I'll just say quickly, this will be able to handle all PlayStation 1. I don't see any ability to use an enhanced resolution. I'd imagine that this would be able to handle a lot of games at a 2x resolution, but we can't do it here due to the settings being locked down. We can also handle Nintendo DS emulation, and now we have N64. Now I was actually pretty happy with N64. Certain games, there was some obvious slowdown. I don't have the ability to show FPS or show speed on here again due to the settings, but there's times obviously where you hear a lot of crackling, things are in slow motion, and that's not super common for the N64 actually. That was usually just small select points. A lot of games I tried out, like Super Mario 64, I don't think I encountered any slowdown at all. I didn't of course play through the whole game or anything, so certain games you never know until you play the whole thing if there's going to be certain points that play better than others, or just small select areas that are bad and the rest of the game is perfectly good. It really depends, but from what I played on Super Mario 64, also playing Mario Kart 64 and a few other games, they appeared to be really good on here. So if in the future we have software improvements, I think we'll be able to get even more improvement on N64. And again, you can go into the settings from the console page on N64 and on these other consoles as well and have some limited settings. Like you can actually change the emulator that's used. So you can see there's a few options here you can switch up if you want to, and a few different settings. Not as much as a lot of people would want, but you can see there are some options for you here to change. And then there's Dreamcast. So I was actually disappointed with the Dreamcast performance. I don't think I'm missing anything that I could do that can improve this. If there is anything and you have one of these handhelds or just have any ideas, let me know. But yeah, I didn't think it was super great. I actually expected it to be better, even with the limited settings that we do have. Games like Crazy Taxi 2, which certainly aren't perfect on other handhelds that are out there in this price range, like some of the H700 RG35XX handhelds, or even with a lowered resolution on RK3326 handhelds, you'll be able to get pretty decent performance sometimes in many games. For example, on, like I said, on the H700 handhelds, you can play Crazy Taxi 2 very well, and on here, it just was not good. There was pretty consistent slowdown. I didn't expect it to be absolutely perfect or anything, but yeah, I wouldn't consider Crazy Taxi 2 to be playable, but going to Crazy Taxi 1, which is usually a little easier to emulate, I could get good performance most of the time, but with some occasional slowdowns. So imagine if we can kind of unlock this handheld, so to speak, get some access to the settings, we will be able to get better performance on Dreamcast. For now, some games will be playable, a lot of them will not be. And then I imagine that even in the ones that are playable, like I mentioned, Crazy Taxi 1, quite a few of them will have the occasional slowdown. So yeah, right now, the state of Dreamcast on this isn't great, especially compared to N64. N64 was actually pretty decent. So then we have PSP. So PSP isn't super great either. You're going to be able to get some games that are playable, like some of the lower end platformers, like this Mega Man game I and a lot of other reviewers always show, because it's always, for whatever reason, included on the stock card. It seems to be working great, but there's plenty of other games that are not super great, about what you'd expect. Some of the higher end stuff is just going to be getting a lot of slowdowns. Some of the mid-range stuff is going to be playable some of the time, other times with slowdown. Again, as time goes goes on and we get more access to settings, it'll be interesting to see what this handheld can do, but for now it's not amazing. And even if it does improve, with a small 2.8-inch screen, you're already going to be having a lot of black bars with a 16:9 ratio. It's very, 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 very small. I even think that's the case on 3.5-inch screens. PSP is pretty small, so it's even worse here. So if you don't mind that, I guess you could enjoy PSP on here, but it's just not great, and the text is going to be super small. You're going to be having to squint, put it close to your face to read certain stuff. So yeah, I don't really think this is optimal for PSP, but in theory, yeah, you can play some stuff on here. So all in all, I actually really like the MagicX XU Mini M. It's not actually super mini. Of course, you have a 2.8-inch screen, but it's fairly comfortable to use, and it's not ultra small where you're hurting your hands. It's a novelty thing. I think it's big enough where almost I could say it's not really a mini handheld, but with a small screen, it's still, I guess, a mini handheld. And we have Hall sticks on it, which really adds to the appeal. The D-pad, of course, can be difficult with diagonals at times, but I think it's generally okay and pretty usable. But like I said earlier in the video, I just wouldn't really recommend buying it yet. Unless you're someone who doesn't care about the settings, you just buy a handheld, take it out of the box, and start playing, and don't really do any setting tweaks at all. If you're someone like that and you're okay with this performance, then I would say yeah, it's actually a pretty good handheld if you like this form factor and everything else. And again, if you do decide to buy it, I'd really appreciate it if you use my link down in the description. It'll be an affiliate link and come at no extra cost to you, but support the channel. But I'll say there actually does seem to be some hope here. There was some indication from the developer that they were trying to get all this worked out. Apparently they outsourced the software to someone else to do. So it does seem like there is some desire to get access to RetroArch and some other settings. Maybe there could be some community effort to get something up and running that is better for this, especially because this has an RK3562. It's probably more uncharted territory. I really have no idea how any of that stuff works. Again, I'm not really recommending it yet, and this is a first impressions video. As more time comes, maybe some other issues will arise. People will notice things, I'll notice things, whatever else. So this is mainly just a first impressions video and not a full-blown review, but I do like this handheld quite a bit, and I think it has a ton of potential. Just the software is lacking. So if the software gets all sorted out, I think I mentioned this earlier, I really think the MagicX XU Mini M will be one of my favorite handhelds of the year. Anyway, so if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.